Between 1954 and 1962, a bitter and brutal conflict rages within the borders of France. A conflict that some historians describe as simultaneously a colonial war, an independence struggle, and a civil war. At its height, France mobilizes the greatest number of soldiers outside of Europe since 1830, and the conflict brings death to hundreds of thousands of civilians, introduces a systematic system of torture and terror, and ends in savage reprisals. Today, we're talking about the Algerian War.
Welcome to Season 1 of Time Ghost Cold War coverage in our series War to War, where we cover the events of the decade after World War II that brought man from the brink of destruction to the threshold of the stars. I'm Spartacus Olsson.
A colonial civil war within France. I think that begs some further explanation. I am Sebastian Brandstetter. Let us begin. Algeria, on the northern coast of Africa, has been under French control since 1830. That year, the Bourbon king, Charles X, decided he needs to avenge the honor of France.
The reason being that in 1827, the ruler of Algiers, the Dey, flicked his fly whisk in the face of the French consul and called him a wicked, faithless, idol-worshipping rascal because he refused to discuss the massive unpaid grain debts from the Napoleonic Wars the France owned. The fly whisk incident.
That's the official story. Anyway, in reality, Charles desperately needs to find something to distract the French from just how much they don't like him as their king. As a result, on June 14th, 1830, 37,000 French troops land at Sétif, 30 kilometers east of Algiers, the capital of the Regency of Algiers.
3 weeks later, the days of the Ottoman province with significant independence, heavily invested in piracy and infamous for its corsairs, and ruled by an elite military unit, the Janissaries, comes to an end, and what historians classify as the Second French Colonial Empire officially begins. This is because while France held colonial remnants after the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, it effectively ceased to be a colonial empire. Yet Charles X can't enjoy his victory for long.
The citoyens and citoyennes of France, the citizens of France, don't forget how much they dislike him as their king, victory in Algiers or not. Not even a month after he successfully defended the honor of France, Charles X has to flee, and the July monarchy under Louis-Philippe emerges.
While Louis takes the reins of power, he and the chambers of government aren't quite sure what to do with Algeria. This is because, as Martin Evans explains, King Charles X stumbled into Algeria with no grand design. While multiple options are debated again and again, no clear consensus emerges yet.
As you might imagine, though, the vast majority of people living in Algeria are not thrilled at the prospect of becoming a French colony or whatever else Paris decides on. So, resistance against the foreign oppressor emerges. At this point, it draws not, at least for now, from an Algerian national identity, though.
Instead, it is a confluence of the transnational Muslim community, Islam, local tribes, and the local Sawiya, Sufi religious centers. Sufism being a local mystical sub-branch of Islam based around the cult of local saints known as marabouts. Leaders like the 25-year-old Abd el-Qadar, self-proclaimed commander of the faithful, accordingly framed their resistance against the French occupiers as a defense of Islam.
From 1832 onwards, he called for a mass jihad to chase out the unbelievers, inflicting on the French a series of embarrassing reverses. For 15 years, he will continue his campaign in the name of Islam, although it will not be crowned by success.
In the meantime, in Paris, another government has come and gone, and by 1848, the Second French Republic is born. With it, the era of military rule and indecisiveness is over, and a new plan emerges.
A plan that is a dramatic departure from Algeria's previous basically colonial status. The northern parts, excluding the vast stretches of the Sahara further south, right where the European settler density is highest, are divided into 3 départements, or departments, just like in metropolitan France.
This means that these parts of Algeria are not a colony or a protectorate or even any other form of suzerainty. No, they are, for all intents and purposes, at least on paper, France, as much as Pas-de-Calais, Côte d'Or, or any of the other 93 metropolitan départements.
Interestingly, this also means that Algeria is officially part of France before Nice or Savoy. The more you know. But why does Paris go that far? One rationale is the same as in any other conventional European colony, the superiority of the white man and so on. I'll let Friedrich Engels summarize the idea in an op-ed he wrote after Abd el-Qadar's surrender in December 1847.
The conquest of Algeria is an important and fortunate fact for the progress of civilization. After all, the modern bourgeois with civilization, industry, order, and at least relative enlightenment following him is preferable to the feudal lord or to the marauding robber with the barbarian state of society to which they belong.
But still, why make it France proper? That's because of France's spin on colonialism, assimilation. Driven by republican ideals, colonial subjects should be governed by the same constitutional laws as French citizens in Europe. Colonies should literally be territorially assimilated, and that through this symbolic integration, you eventually reach real integration.
But as so often with ideals, they remain far removed from reality. Take this example from Napoleon III's decree made in 1865. By now, the Second Republic has given way to yet another new government, the Second Empire, which is different from the Second Colonial Empire, just so you know.
Anyways, Napoleon III says the Muslim native is French, but he shall continue to be governed by Muslim law.
If that, demanding obedience without granting civil rights, is not second-rate citizenship, I don't know what is, and during this period, this is by far not the worst thing suffered by the natives. The number of European settlers swells, and settlement there is now actively encouraged and sometimes forcibly undertaken in metropolitan France from roughly 37,000 in 1848 to over 200,000 in 1870.
Along the same vein, these settlers, only 1/10 the size of the Muslim native population, gain control of vast swaths of forcibly repossessed land, locals violently driven from their ancestral holdings.
Not to mention that the European minority also holds disproportionate legal, governmental, and economic power. These European settler class, known as the Pieds Noirs, will have monumental significance later on.
But all of that is still, by far, not the worst the locals have suffered in the time span from conquest in 1830 to 1870. In 1830, the local Muslim population numbered about 3 million. In 1870, it numbers roughly 2.
That's because to force Algeria under control, to fight leaders like Abd el-Qadar, to seize land for settlers, and so on, France unleashed a campaign of unimaginable brutality. Villages were torched, beheadings became a routine, as did rape, and whole communities were wiped out. Thousands of men, women, and children were suffocated alive in caves, dying a slow death in heaps of desperate bodies, their embraces lasting longer than did their lives.
The carnage, murder, executions, scorched earth policies, famine, displacement, and destruction of infrastructure left nearly 1 million dead. In other words, a third of the population. And while the exact figure is debated, many historians, like Matthew Connolly, because of the sheer scale and naked brutality, liken what happened to, or outright call it, genocide.
From 1870 onward, France expands its second colonial empire under the Third Republic. Yes, another government change, following Napoleon III's reign, which ended with his defeat at the Franco-Prussian War. Now, after the scramble for Africa, Algeria is flanked to the left by the Protectorate of Morocco and to the right by the Protectorate of Tunisia.
Unlike Algeria, they, and no parts of them, are not considered part of metropolitan France. Over the turn of the century, this idea that Algeria, or at least the three northern departments, are France, has further ingrained itself into French national identity.
Between 1900 and 1945, the seeds of conflict sown over 7 decades of conquest and dispossession begin to bear bitter fruit. The demographic time bomb continues to tick. The Muslim population recovers from the trauma of the conquest years, growing to over 7 million by 1945, while the settler population peaks at around 900,000.
And while French oppression has lessened somewhat in intensity and scope, it never goes away, and the memory of 1 million dead lingers and festers in the minds of local Muslims. So it is France that inadvertently bursts an Algerian national identity through the shared suffering rendered upon the natives at the direction of Paris.
And it is there, in Paris, in 1926, where this idea is first distilled into an organization, the Étoile Nord Africaine, the ENA, North African Star, with Messali Hadj at its helm.
Messali was already talking of revolution, and the Étoile program declared for universal suffrage in Algeria, a struggle for the total independence of all three Maghreb nations and confiscation of all property acquired by the French government or colons.
2 world wars also profoundly disrupt the colonial order. As many 173,000 Algerian soldiers served France in World War I, leading to 25,000 deaths and 60 to 70,000 wounded. Yet, post-war reforms remain meager and begrudging.
World War II brings further upheaval. During the fall of France, the war in North Africa, and the Allied reconquest of mainland Europe from 1943 onwards, between 200,000 and 230,000 more soldiers from Algeria, most likely some 134,000 Muslim Algerians, 18,000 of which are never to return, are called to battle for France, with another 200,000 supporting the war effort in other capacities. A sizable part of the French Expeditionary Corps in Italy and of the First Army, which liberated France alongside the Allies, was made up of Algerian troops.
Now, especially the rhetoric of the Atlantic Charter promising self-determination to colonized peoples raises expectations everywhere, also in Algeria, that the European colonial empires will back down and grant freedom to their colonies. This slowly building tension erupts violently and all at once on a day that should have been cause only for joy and celebration. Victory in Europe Day, the 8th of May, 1945, in Sétif.
Algerians join Europeans and the Pied Noir, the French settlers, in celebrating the Allied victory over Nazi Germany. But their celebration carries different meanings. Thousand march brandishing British, American, Soviet, French, and Algerian flags, and placards with the slogans "Long live Messali," for the liberation of peoples, long live free and independent Algeria, down with colonialism, and long live the Atlantic Charter.
When gendarmes spot a 20-year-old named Bouziz Salah proudly waving an Algerian flag, they take brutal drastic action. They shoot and kill the young man on the spot. Instantly, the demonstration morphs into a riot, then into an uprising across the whole Constantine department.
In response, Governor-General Yves Châtaigneux unleashes 10,000 troops who harken back to the genocidal violence of the mid to late 19th century. Whole villages are erased and Algerians are slaughtered wholesale. Official French figures claim 1,500 dead, while Algerian estimates exceed 45,000.
The general who directly orchestrates this butchery, General Duval, cables back to Paris. "I have given you peace for 10 years, but don't deceive yourselves."
And, out of a desperate desire to cling on to and restore France's past imperial glory, and because of the by now firmly established community of the Pied Noir with a distinct French cultural identity, one intrinsically linked to European superior culture and Algeria as a part of France, together with the shock of Sétif, any hopes of reform, not to mention independence, more or less go out of the window. As the Echo d'Alger, a Pied Noir mouthpiece, proclaims.
"When the house is on fire, when the ship is about to sink, one calls for neither the insurance company nor the dancing master. For the house, it's the hour of the fireman. For the ship, the hour of the lifeboat. For North Africa, c'est l'heure du gendarme, the hour of the policeman."
So, As the Earth enters a new post-World War order, with the United Nations Charter enshrining principles of self-determination and decolonization, and while independence movements gather momentum from India to Indonesia, the foundations of French Algeria become fatally weakened, and Paris desperately clings to the notion that Algeria is France.
At the same time, the impact of Sétif and the subsequent massacres on Algerians was incalculable and ineradicable. As the liberal poet Khatib Yassine recounts, my sense of humanity was affronted for the first time by the most atrocious sights. I was 16 years old. The shock which I felt at the pitiless butchery that caused the deaths of thousands of Muslims, I have never forgotten. From that moment, my nationalism took definite form.
And as for Khatib, this is a catalyst for a new generation of Algerians who hadn't witnessed the massacres from 70 years ago. Further galvanized by the false promises of a new world order, a new, or rather changed, independence movement emerges. And one thing is crystal clear to many of them, that freedom could not be gained by peaceful means, and that French colonialism would only acknowledge their right to freedom through force.
Out of this generational crucible, a new nationalist organization will emerge, and General Duval's prophecy will almost ring true. 9, not 10 years later, on the 31st of October 1954, 9 historic figures, including Mohamed Boudiaf, Ahmed Ben Bella, and Belkacem Krim, announced the founding of the National Liberation Front, the FLN.
The FLN has a firm agenda for complete independence, and unlike previous more moderate reformist organizations, the FLN holds the stern belief that only through armed struggle would Algeria be free.
On the night of 31st October to 1st of November of 54, the FLN strikes across Algeria in 70 separate, hastily coordinated attacks. In the Aurès, fighters ambush barracks and police stations. In Kabylia, storehouses burn. In Algiers, bombs target the radio station and gasworks.
The attacks leave 9 dead, 4 wounded, and a significant amount of material damage. From Cairo, FLN broadcasts a declaration calling on Algerian Muslims to join a national struggle for restoration of the Algerian state, sovereign, democratic, and social, within the framework of the principles of Islam.
For the moment, the strikes are crude and uncoordinated, but deliberately so. What matters is not military victory, but visibility, as Aban will later instruct. Kill one enemy in Algiers, which the American press will report the next day. From its inception, the FLN pursues a clear strategy, internationalizing Algeria through Cairo delegations and Arab support, transforming a colonial war into a global question.
In Paris, France reacts with defiance. On the 12th of November, French Minister of the Interior, François Mitterrand, declares before the National Assembly, Algeria is France. The government announces reform programs while dispatching armed forces. To Paris, this is by no means a colonial war, nor any war for that matter, and other states should mind their own business. This is an inner French problem, not a job for the Foreign Ministry, but the Ministry of the Interior.
By December, there is also a conflict from within, though. Rival nationalist Mezali Haj founds the competing MNA, splitting the anti-colonial movement and sparking internecine conflict.
Back in Paris, the Mendes government collapses, unable to reach consensus on which reforms to pursue. FYI, we're now in the Fourth Republic, the third having fallen after the Battle of France in 1940.
Power passes to the Faure government, which, with parliamentary approval, declares a state of emergency in parts of Algeria and equips the army with expanded legal powers. In May 1955, they recall 8,000 active reservists and announce plans to delay the release of 100,000 draftees.
Within 1 year, French troop numbers in Algeria spike from 75,000 in January to 180,000 by December. The reason for this steep buildup is another massacre. If V-Day 1945 was the breaking point for Algerians, the Philippeville massacres of the 20th of August 1955 is the breaking point for the French government.
There, 37 Europeans are killed, including 10 children, by Algerian workers they had known for years. Peasants armed with knives and clubs attacked for 3 days. Overall, 123 die, 71 Pieds Noirs and soldiers, and 21 Algerians. While Paris may not call it a war, they now declare an all-out war on the FLN. Algeria is France, and France means to keep it.
In the aftermath of Philippeville, the French response is ferocious. At El Haila, 80 Algerians are shot dead on the spot. In Philippeville itself, hundreds are herded into the local football stadium and executed. Whole villages are subjected to collective reprisal, and photographers catalog explicit details of victims hacked to pieces even after death, men emasculated, mothers disemboweled, children mutilated. The death counts vary wildly, from the French side at 1,273 to the Algerian estimate of up to 12,000. Contemporary American diplomatic reporters detail up to 20,000 dead.
With this as the backdrop, the FLN's internationalization strategy is beginning to bear fruit. The topic of Algeria first reaches the United Nations on 30th of September 1955. The French delegation leaves in protest and only returns in November, restating that this is a wholly internal affair and that the UN has no business meddling in questions of France's sovereignty.
By December, Faure's government falls as well, unable to govern the contradiction between reform and repression/military action. New elections arrive on the 2nd of January 1956. The Republican Front coalition wins, promising peace in Algeria, and Guy Mollet becomes prime minister.
Yet, on February 6, when Mollet arrives in Algiers to install his liberal reform package, he's met at the war memorial by tens of thousands of Pieds Noirs settlers, some of whom have lived there for generations by now, and for whom Algeria is indivisible from France itself.
They pelt him with rotten tomatoes, clods of earth, and horse manure. To them, compromise means betrayal. The crowd roars for his designated reformer, General Massu, to face a firing squad. Mollet beats a retreat, and that evening, Massu withdraws his appointment. With him, really departs any liberal Algerian policy. The Day of Tomatoes, as it's called, marks the firm settler veto. To them too, Algeria is France. No negotiation, and especially no reform.
As Mollet abandons his reformist intentions in Algiers, the machinery of war is already further stoked back in Paris. On the 16th of March 1956, the National Assembly accepts the Loi des Pouvoirs Spéciaux, the Special Powers Act.
This decree grants the Mollet government and the French military in Algeria the most extensive powers to take all exceptional measures required for re-establishing order, the protection of people and property, as well as the safety of the territory.
From April through June 1956, Opération Valmy, the largest deployment of French forces outside the mainland since 1830, transforms Algeria into an armed fortress, where 180,000 troops garrisoned the country in December 1955. The numbers climbed dramatically until by summer 1956, France doubles its forces to 400,000 soldiers.
Yet, this vast deployment cannot suppress the violence festering in Algeria's cities. On the 30th of September 1956, the FLN launches its opening salvos in what would become, or will become, the Battle of Algiers.
Using female operatives disguised as European ladies to slip past army checkpoints, the FLN detonates bombs at two crowded cafes in the city center, the Milk Bar and the Cafeteria, killing 3 to 4 people and wounding upwards of 50.
It is a calculated strike, designed to shatter the illusion of French control. The city descends into chaos as bombings routinely rock neighborhoods from then on.
As the Battle of Algiers unfolds, events in the Middle East become more inextricably entangled with the conflict, especially from the French perspective. In October 1956, the Suez crisis erupts in the Middle East. To learn more about it, check out our dedicated episode here on Time Ghost, or our whole series about it. What matters for Algeria? France strikes at Egypt partly to punish Nasser, who has become the FLN's most significant foreign backer. Meanwhile, in Algiers, Robert Lacoste, minister resident in Algeria, recognizes that conventional police methods have failed and makes a fateful decision. On January 7, 1957, he hands over all police powers in Algiers to General Jacques Massu, commander of the 10th Paratrooper Division. With this transfer of authority comes the mandate to restore law and order, a phrase that becomes a euphemism for methods that will scar Algeria for generations.
Massu and his paratroopers do not merely attempt to break the FLN's grip on Algiers, they will reshape the entire character of the war, institutionalizing practices that will haunt the nation long after independence is won.
And that is where the story ends for today. For the moment, neither Algerian nor French nationalists are willing to budge a single inch. And now, with the unleashing of violence in Algiers by the FLN, the darkest and vilest aspect of the conflict is about to begin, when Massu and the 10th Paratrooper Division will unleash pure terror on a whole city.
And while the French are literally fighting on the ground, they're also faced with ever greater resistance within the international community. To everyone but them, and perhaps to Britain, it is clear that the Age of Empires has ended. How many more lives will it take before Paris also sees the writing on the wall? And how much longer will Britain and the US, the two most influential allies France has, be willing to sit by and ignore that this is no longer part of the new international order based on shared values, specifically human rights?
To find out, check back on the Time Ghost channel and watch the second episode once it is out, and if it isn't already by the time you are watching this. To become part of the mission to understand the mistakes of the past, to prevent the tragedies of tomorrow, join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com.
Excelsior!